Hello, today we're going to be presenting on The Black Death by Sean Martin. So, for thesis and main ideas, in this book, Martin provides an excellent survey of the history and prehistory of the Black Death in different European and Eastern cities throughout time, concentrating on the medieval period. He does well with examining primary source material in terms of its scientific context, as well as placing major consideration on historical, social, and political contexts, trying to make sense and connect everything and all the chaos that happens, not only through illness, but also through the political and social times during the medieval times.
Thinking about how this book was formatted, we were really interested in how it sourced its different sources because it wasn't citing them actually in the text, which made it feel more like a narrative and it flowed really well. And there was still suggested reading at the end, but it wasn't just the bibliographies, it was also descriptions of what you could find in those sources that was relevant to this text. So it was really conducive to narrowing down how to get more information. And we kind of thought about how this could relate to as we write our theses, how we can find a format for them that best matches the actual content of what we're writing.
In terms of memorable aspects of the book, I think even we thought that even right at the start in the intro in the chapter called King's Death, there was a very gripping start. So he opened by saying, "Scarcely anyone on board the 12 Genoese galleys was left alive, and those who were exhibited a pronounced lethargy and a strange sickness that seemed to cling to their very bones. They suffered from black boils, and everything that came out of their bodies, breath, blood, and pus, smelled awful." So even from the very beginning, the author was very skilled at like giving us a description to kind of situate us into the context of the Black Death in relation to what we've known, since the plague is a very like prominent event in history that everybody learns about. And so by being very descriptive at the very start, it kind of just encourages you to read or to be more engaged as you're reading throughout the book. And it also talks about the era of lawlessness that began with the onset of the Black Plague, which is something that was mentioned by the speaker in class last week as well. He wrote that fear of the gods or the law of man did not restrain them. As for the first, they judged it to be just the same whether they worshipped them or not, as they saw all alike perishing. And for the last, no one expected to live to be brought to trial for his offenses, but each felt that a far severer sentence had been already passed upon them all and hung over their heads, and before this fell, it was only reasonable to enjoy life a little. So, kind of the hedonistic approach to life that people started to live just because they felt so there was like desperation and they felt that there were no more consequences that could be worse with what they were feeling.
Another memorable aspect that was towards the end of the book was this idea of biological warfare. So among the variants, Marmot plague is by far the most virulent, a fact borne out by the attempts of Soviet scientists to develop Marmot plague as a biological weapon during the Cold War. It is also horrifically contagious and can be transmitted by breathing in contaminated air. Additionally, in one of the Cold War's most bizarre episodes in 1952, the Americans released plague-infested voles into China. So this was a passage that was mentioned almost in passing as they were talking about different kinds of plagues, but it was something I wanted to learn more about. So doing some research, there's actually a lot of controversy over whether or not these accusations were accurate on either side, either the Americans, Chinese, Russians. It's really hard to prove with biological warfares. Additionally, looking at the Middle Ages, there's also some evidence that they might have actually flung corpses with the plague over attacking villages, but that has also been sort of debunked in recent scholarship. But overall, it's just interesting to think in the broader context of our course, how we talk about this tension between man and disease as if we're completely trying to fight disease, but there's also a tendency for humanity to weaponize things like that can be so destructive. And this has a precedent all the way into ancient times. The more I researched this, the more I found even Herodotus um, records soldiers dipping arrows into decomposing bodies to pass on bacteria. So sometimes it's not just man against disease, but man against man as well.
In terms of an important passage, we thought that this one on page 55 to 56 about Pope Clement VI was really significant. It reads, although Clement seems to have done all he could given the circumstances, the church during the Black Death was in a tight corner. The duties of priests necessarily entailed dealing with the sick, and they, along with doctors, proved to be the two professions with the highest mortality rates. Despite this, priests in many areas were unpopular, as they were seen as agents of a church that could not stop the plague. If the intercessions of the church to the Almighty were having no effect, then that meant either that the church was not interceding hard enough on behalf of its people, or that God had abandoned the church, disgusted like the peasant at its enormous wealth and opulence and its zealous pursuit of worldly power. So we thought that this was really important because we hear like throughout history that people are being punished, that when sicknesses starts to spread that they're being punished by God. But here it's kind of like a different perspective where even the church itself is facing the consequences of like it says here, it's enormous wealth and opulence. And kind of like puts the history of the church as being like greedy in some cases and kind of just like abusing its power sometimes. It's kind of highlighting that and seeing and recognizing that this is something that the people also um, noticed and saw, and to the extent that they were also recognizing that the church could have played a big part through this religious perspective in kind of the downfall of everyone through the Black Death.
So, as we said, that this book covers a lot of different aspects of the Black Death, but we believe that the way that the author wrote it, that it could be for any student of medieval studies or someone interested in learning about medieval studies and the Black Death. He takes on a large task in thinking about the history of the Black Death over a large period, but he does it in extremely clear and easy to follow language, and it's very engaging. He makes Honestly, he makes learning about a not so positive thing very interesting, as the titles of the chapters are interesting and creative, and he also has a very easy to follow and compelling writing style where his passages are not only rich in content, but also the way he writes them and the way he presents them to the audience makes it easy for anyone to follow, which is great to let people know about not only the medical aspects of the Black Death, but also the other and overwhelming circumstances that affected everyone and everything during these times.
So, like Alexandra said, what we liked about the book was its very engaging writing style. It had interesting chapter titles that kind of hooked the reader in. And overall, it provided a brief but very relevant overview on the past instances of outbreaks of plague through the lens of history, religion, and sociology. We also liked that the author didn't shy away from scientific writing, so he talked about the three types of plague: bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic, and also kind of went into how these are different in terms of the different mechanisms of action that each of them entailed.
And although it was super concise and engaging, it is a at sometimes we wanted a little more information on certain time periods or cities. He covered a lot, like, oh, the Black Plague went to Florence and it stopped in or Orvieto and whatnot. And but they were still, because it was trying to engage all types of readers and scholars. We as students of pre-modern medicine would have liked a little more information in some places. So
Agreed. Yeah. Good for a general audience, but and helpful for a broad overview, but yeah, it gave good overview to find more details within.
So we give this a thumbs up. Like we said, it's an accessible introduction to many people. It introduces readers, those who understand the history of and know the history of medicine, and those who are just interested. It's very engaging and easy to follow, and he gives us all the necessary information to learn about it.
Finally, our discussion question that we'd like to know more about in class is how compelling is religious ritual and prayer in treating Black Death? And how does religion affect psychological reactions to disease in terms of fear, hope, or other emotions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.